You are listening to the Sod Pod, brought to you by Grassland Agro. Hello and welcome to the Sod Pod. This week we are joined with our Head of Strategic Process and Regulation, John O'Loughlin. John has been on the podcast many times, I suppose, in the past when he was on the product and technical team. I suppose a lot of you probably remember him from all his Clare Hurling talk when they were going well. John, looks great to have you on the podcast. How are you keeping?
Great. How are you keeping, Clodagh?
All good now. Can't complain.
Fair play.
John, yourself and some of the team you work alongside, you had an interesting trip there last week to a potash mine in Germany. You might tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we went to Potash Mine there. Clodagh, it was my first time in a mine, and it was a really interesting trip. We flew to Germany and we got trains which aren't as efficient as the stereotypes would lead you to believe, and we made a couple of mistakes now, so we don't know who's to blame for that one, Clodagh, but I was certainly
nothing less.
I was certainly not in charge of the trains. Anyways, I was like a young lad going on holidays with my parents. You nearly handed them the passport when you got to the airport, but so I was definitely following. But no, it was a fantastic trip. So we got the trains. We arrived anyways into Magdeburger, which is in the middle of Germany, and big city. But the following morning we went down the mine. So the mine is 800 meters deep. They have an elevator to bring you up and down the shaft. It only takes 30 or 40 seconds to get down, so fairly tipping. You go through quite a rigorous health and safety induction before you go down. When we got down, then we got onto the back of a pickup that had seats, and we drove for an hour, a distance of around 40 kilometers to the face of the mine that they're using now. So the scale was incredible. They're extracting 3 million tons of potash per year from that particular mine, and then it goes by rail after it's processed to Hamburg port. And it's pretty much servicing the European market from that particular mine. It was incredible to see it now, the scale and how they work. Down the mine itself, then, Clodagh, it was 42 degrees temperature.
Jeez.
And it was 1% humidity, so it was incredibly dry. The company who invited us, and thanks to Jerry, was K&S, and they actually have their original potash mine in, I think it's more southerly part of Germany, has been decommissioned, but they actually have turned it into an amenity kind of a attraction, so you can go down and you can run a marathon if that's what you fancy, and that sort of temperatures and that sort of humidity. And they do concerts down there as well, and they actually it was actually where Hitler would have stored an awful lot of his gold and stuff like that back before or during the war or whatever. So just amazing history, and my first time being down a mine, so really cool.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Geez, I don't think I'd be running a marathon below there now. I think that'd
No,
be
I wouldn't be able
a
to do
slow
one
form of
above ground.
torture.
Yeah.
Was it very high tech, John, or was it fairly manual, or what?
Yeah, so the machinery that was employed, you have this kind of specific, so it's obviously salt that they're extracting, and then it's refined into potash or MOP as we know it. The tech was basically, the process is they have 3 different types of machines in the mine, right? So the first one probably is like the undercarriage of a digger, so on tracks with an engine on top of it that can rotate. It has a man basket that's telescopic, and then they have drills that will drill explosives into the side of the vein of potash that they're trying to extract. And then they have a team of 2 then who are putting in the explosives, and then they do the blasting when everyone is out of the mine. So they blast kind of a 7 meter deep and 7 meters high, and they have a really interesting way of doing that. Now, I wouldn't have the finer points of that particular way of how they start increasing the length of the mine and stuff like that. But then the next machine probably is a scaler, which is like a big loading shovel with a low cab that has a tooth on it.
Mm-hmm.
And basically that's used to scratch the tunnels and the mines, so to prevent any collapse of any of the mines. And then the third machine, that's a big massive loading shovel then with a huge bucket on it that takes the blasted material to a conveyor belt system. They were saying that I think they maybe have 80 or 100 kilometers of conveyors that bring it back
Jeez.
to just under the factory, and then it goes up a separate shaft to the shaft that the people are using then. So yeah, it was incredible to see the scale of it. But it's unique now, being down that far and experiencing it. So it was cool, yeah.
Mm. And what was Germany like itself?
Germany now was good. The World Cup kicked off when we were over there on the Thursday. The food was a bit tricky now for lads like myself now who are be more used to bacon and cabbage, but it was nice now, to be fair.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for that, John. That's very interesting and a good insight into the mine. I'm going to switch over just to the topic of CBAM. So I suppose for farmers that might be still a little bit confused as to what CBAM actually is, you might just explain it for them there.
Yeah, this will get everyone excited now, Clodagh. CBAM talk.
This is where they'll turn off the podcast
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, 100%. So CBAM is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, right? CBAM has been around for 4 years now, probably. But it wasn't until the 1st of January 2026 when we actually entered the definitive period of CBAM, which effectively means that that's the definitive period is when you have to start paying for the carbon attached to fertilizer. And basically, what CBAM means is that we hadn't been previously accounting for the emissions involved in producing fertilizer, whereas now we have to, and it's based on the embedded emissions involved in the manufacture of fertilizer. When that fertilizer gets to an EU border, those emissions have to be paid for. Mm-hmm. And really, to be honest with you, it's a protectionist measure for EU fertilizer producers, because EU fertilizer producers have much higher standards of emission reduction compared to third countries, which is anyone outside the EU, and it's trying to level the playing field. And it's effectively that the producer pays for carbon that's involved in the manufacture of that fertilizer. Previously, when we were doing the emission calculations for fertilizer in Ireland, it was all based on the emissions that occurred when the fertilizer was applied, whereas now it's a much more stringent measure, looking at from the actual manufacturer right away to spreading the fertilizer. So what that means is that basically we have to buy a carbon credit, or a CBAM certificate is what its technical definition is, for the emissions involved in the manufacture of that fertilizer now, Clodagh.
Okay. And I suppose in terms of the fertilizer coming into Ireland, what does that actually mean on farm?
Yeah. Well, so this is one thing that we've been advocating for, is that, like, if you look in Ireland, our main strategy on emission reduction is really protected urea. Mm-hmm. Problem with that is that over 80% of Europe's urea comes from outside of the EU, and a high proportion, even more urea for Irish, because we don't produce any fertilizer in Ireland, comes. So our proportion could be 95% of the urea that comes from outside the EU. So obviously that's going to add costs to urea, and that could maybe damage the growth of protected urea in Ireland, which would be contrary to our national emission strategy. So that's a big challenge for farmers, and effectively what it means on some of the key ingredients like urea and DAP especially, which typically come from outside the EU, you're likely to have charges of that are going to increase over the next few years. But for 2026, for example, it's €50 for urea and it's €21 for DAP. So that's what it means in pound, shillings, and pence for farmers.
Okay, very good. I've seen in like the Farmers Journal and Agriland, there's talks of a support scheme for fertilizer. Has there been much
Yeah.
talk of that in the industry, or?
Yeah, so there is so that's the METSAF, and basically what that's trying to do is that the fertilizer markets are quite suppressed in relation to the volume of business that's being done at the moment. So it's trying to kickstart demand for fertilizer while prices are very elevated, and offers sort of a relief to farmers. It's a little bit tricky to get any concrete details on that at the moment to give
Yeah.
a real educated answer. But I suppose it's very interesting to see how it develops. And if we do get more concrete details, we'll come back and give everyone an overview of it. But I think the reason for it is kind of to offset maybe the suspension of CBAM. So basically, CBAM on the 1st of January came into effect where we had to pay the money. On the 7th of January, they announced their intention to introduce a possible mechanism for the suspension of CBAM during periods of elevated prices, which we saw come the 28th of February into March with the war in Iran, and prices skyrocketed. So that's exactly why it was introduced for a situation like that. Where people maybe get confused is that they introduced a draft article that's not in legislation. So there's no actual mechanism or legal framework to suspend CBAM at the moment, and to the best of my knowledge, it hasn't been passed yet. But effectively, what the stance from the EU Commission seems to be at the moment is that when they're reluctant to suspend CBAM, which is adding maybe that €50 onto urea, and given the jump in prices is quite modest. But they seem reluctant to do that because what they want to do is try and push self-sufficiency of fertilizer within Europe, so that that's a huge aspect of food security. So listen, I'm not sure where it's going to land. I'm not sure how it's going to go in relation to, you'd even think in the last week from a government point of view, the challenges we have with water quality, and maybe the return of water quality nitrates levels to maybe we're backtracking a little bit in the progress that we made last year. And then are they going to go and introduce, a subsidy for fertilizer? I don't know. I'd obviously love if they did, but when you stand back from it and look at it, it's hard to know if they will, and it's hard to know if the money will be available as well, Clodagh, when you see what's happening with CAP and you name it there as well, and department maybe pulling back on TAMs and stuff like that, obviously keep within their budget. So it'd be very interesting to see how it plays out now over the next couple of weeks and months.
Yeah, it will be. And thanks for that. It's not an easy topic to talk about, but I suppose just in terms of managing these higher costs, John, of fertilizer, and not just fertilizer, feed and everything else, what do you think are the three most important things a farmer should do, I suppose, in terms of reducing their reliance on chemical fertilizer going forward?
Yeah, I'd say just one. I'd say just getting your pH sorted.
Yeah.
Simple as that, Clodagh. You're the expert on lime. You've done all the homework on it and the research in your masters, but you know better than anyone. It's that simple. If the lime is off, you're wasting your time. Back in 2022, we were doing lots of field events, and my line was farmers were outraged by the price of €1,000 a ton, rightly as they should be, for whatever can urea or whatever it was. But the unfortunate reality is that a lot of those farmers had been paying €1,000 a ton for the last 5 years, because CAN was at 300, pH, P and K or whatever were suboptimal as well. You're only getting 30% efficiency out of that nitrogen. So if you multiply that threefold increase that you would get by correcting your soil pH, or the threefold reduction in the efficacy of that product, that product that was costing you 300 was actually costing you 9, because you're only getting 30% efficiency. So that would be the biggest one. The other thing in costs in general, it's quite simple. It's lime and grass, and they're quite boring. But I think in the short term, correcting grass quality as quickly as possible. I'm going to go against the conventional wisdom, but doing a bit of pre-mowing or topping like is not the end of the world. And I think it's naive. Like if you're compromising grass quality because you don't want to do a bit of pre-mowing or topping because someone in a discussion group will be giving out to you, I think it's nonsense. Like, there will have to be corrections made. Grass is very difficult to in this sort of weather. I know it's probably easier in the fact that we've had enough moisture across the country and it's not getting as stressed, but it's getting muddy there. Like we're getting big rain events there, 10 or 15 mil a night. If you have to correct it. There's no point waiting forever. Like, and the other bugbear of mine at the start of this season when people were talking about cutting costs was everyone was like, oh, I'm going to cut down on the amount of surplus bales I'm going to make. And I just think that's the complete wrong strategy. The biggest way to reduce, or the quickest way or the easiest way to reduce the number of surplus bales that you want is to make surplus bales. And what I mean by that is do your grass walk and make your decision and go at it straight away. And yes, obviously the weather has been very catchy, so it's been hard to do that. But listen, if you need to do a bit of topping or whatever, instead of that, just get the quality right now. And listen, before we know it, we'll be getting into middle of July and we'll be going to plant and be moving back into the vegetative stage. But if we don't correct it now, I think we're going to really limit our production and our performance off grass.
That's very true, John. Like if you don't correct the quality now, you're going to have to correct it at some stage. If you leave that cover go back up to your 1400, it's still going to be stemmy, like.
Yeah.
So you're gonna have to correct it at some stage. So you may as well just correct it now. And I seen actually an interesting article in the journal there, was it 2 weeks ago? And basically, like obviously the weather was bad and farmers are kind of saying, oh, I don't want to make soggy bales or whatever. But the longer you leave that grass out, your demand is going to get higher and it's less grass going into the cow, and ultimately you might tap into feeding a bit more meal. If you take those soggy bales out, get the grass in quicker, you're going to get a better return, I suppose, at the end of the day. Like,
100%. Like if you're taking out stuff over a cover of 1400 and you're like, oh sure, I'll wait a week, like that 1400 goes to 2.5, could be 2,800 so quickly. Like, so the first 3 weeks it goes, from 0 to 400, then it goes, the second week goes from 400 to 800, and in the third week in good growth and go from 800 to 1600, like, so there's your 20-day round, your 18-day round or whatever. So it's definitely, you limit the amount of bales, quicker you act. And the other side of it is like we all have short memories. Like when you think of all the hard summers and the wet springs that we've had, like imagine if you had decent quality, and listen, some people push back and they say, how come suddenly this grass goes from poor quality grazing into rocket fuel bales, as we call them. And when they were so poor you didn't want to graze them, and then like what happens over this 6 months. But like it is going to be still, if the paddock is wiry and it's not hectic looking from a grazing point of view, it's in 9 times out of 10 it's going to be better than a lot of people's first cut silage. And that's where having that surplus and having a decent bank of them for either wet springs or dry summers is invaluable. And I think we probably, it sounds like I'm giving out now, but I think we probably just either go to give an extra pull of nuts too quickly, or else we go to start feeding PK very quickly because it's handy and it's easy. But in reality, like they're all massive costs compared to making a few bales. Like.
Yeah, 100%. And John, I suppose lastly, you wanted to mention there about the IGA, the Irish Grassland Association summer tour.
Yeah, I did. I'm involved in the organising committee, Clodagh, so we need every man, woman and child to buy a ticket and get down on the 21st of July. I was on the Farmers Journal thing there 2 weeks ago and I gave the wrong date. I gave last year's date. which was still
Good man.
stuck in my head, which was the 23rd of July. So I can confirm it's actually the 21st of July. Ballymacarbery tickets are on sale on the Irish Grassland Association website. We've a lot of corporate members as well, so there'll be a good crowd from that. Hopefully, will turn up as well. But basically, it's on Ballymac in County Waterford, just outside Clonmel, on two farms. Really unique situation. Michael and Ollie O'Gorman. I'm just going to give a couple of headline figures. Michael and Ollie's fathers farmed in partnership together. They inherited. Now, and some of this isn't going to be 100% accurate, so if the lads are listening, they'll correct me on the day, but they started with 80 acres and they worked and worked and worked and grew that farm from 80 acres to 300 odd acres, and they bought land around them in such a way that when it came to pass on to the next generation, Michael and Ollie, they both started with 140 or 50 odd acres each, bouncing each other all in the one block, and 98 cows, number of replacement heifers, and I think it was 30 cattle as well. So they were able to split it exactly in half by doing that bit of planning in advance, and it was all thought out. It wasn't just, oh, we're going to go and buy the next bit of ground. It was all bought very strategically, and then they were able to grow the business then. So on the day, we'll give an overview of the history of the farm, and what's interesting is that Michael and Ollie's parents, our fathers, inherited the farm very young, and then due to tragic circumstances, it was the same for the two lads as well, where they started farming quite young as well, and they've two different models there. Well, they're not, they're the same. They have very similar genetics. They have very similar soil type because the farms are bound in each other. Both very good at grass. But I suppose one of the stories is that Michael is probably focused on the home farm and growing that and optimizing that. Delivered well over 515 or 20 kilos of solids. And then Ollie has kind of focused more on expansion through the home farm itself as well, but also expanding with multiple units as well. And he's done that with his brothers, David and Pa, and they have kind of 5 milking platforms, 5 units between them, and they'll explain the intricacies of how they're split up, because all 3 of them have 1 unit each, and then there's a couple of 50-50 joint ventures then. So it's a fascinating story. Just it's hard nearly to get your head around how good of a job Michael is doing, and then the expansion and all that comes with that, and the multiple units then on Ollie's farm. So that's what's in store. It'll be a really good day.
Yeah, they seem like very good operators. All right, I'll definitely be there on the day anyway.
Great. Another ticket sold there.
That's great, John. Thanks very much for all of that. Appreciate you coming on the podcast. So I suppose, look, we'll leave it there for today, and we'll be back again in 2 weeks' time.